I'm Jamila. Just to begin with, I'm going to kind of go through what women's publishing was like for me growing up. So this is an example of what women's magazines were like for me as a young girl. So just to kind of read out some of the cover stories to you. Kegels, the most important 5 minutes of your day. How to rock his world with your inner bad girl. 60 sex tips. Look leaner naked. So, you know, this is kind of exactly what was wrong in my eyes with women's publishing. The idea that you are dictating to women how they should look and how they should act, with the one main goal, which is obviously really, really important to a modern woman, to secure the dream guy while looking as skinny as humanly possible. So the other aspect of this is that it was a really, really rare thing to see a woman of colour on the cover of a magazine. And you can begin to see why that might be when you think about the editorial teams running those magazines. So this is the Vogue editorial team under the last editor. So this is their team in 2017. And you can see how when you have a white woman at the top of a industry, it kind of has this trickle-down effect quite often. And now when you've got a team of people that looks like this, you can kind of see why they're not likely to put women of colour on the magazine of publications. So one of the publications that I really like, which is this kind of alternative women's magazine, which I'm not going to name, I once did this little test with it where I decided to count how many covers had women of colour on over their entire run. 3 out of 16, with 2 of those being in the past year. So that really gives you an idea of the fact that there wasn't much representation for people of colour within women's publishing until quite recently. When I came up with the idea for the magazine that I run now, this is what my life looked like. So it was February 2015, I just turned 20, and I was living with this lovely group of guys in this converted hotel in Kemp Town. I was 2 years into a degree I absolutely hated, and I was partying all the time. It's safe to say that I was in a bit of a rut. So I started coming up with ideas of creative projects that I might do to stimulate myself in other ways. And I came back to this idea of the fact that I really, really loved magazines growing up. I used to love magazines that were kind of based around fashion, and I used to tear the pages out and stick them on my wall. But I never felt like I could see myself in those pages or on those editorial teams. And I think that's the thing. When you don't see people like yourselves in an industry, it takes a leap of imagination to put yourself there. So I was thinking, you know, that's probably the same for other young women. What can I do to alter that and make them feel like they could be within these spaces and run other publications? So I came up with the idea for Typical Girls. This was intended to be an alternative women's magazine which allowed women from a variety of backgrounds and age groups to represent themselves in their own words. And it was meant to be a space where you could see women that looked like yourself within it, see women that were kind of more close to you, see your mother, your sister, your friend, and women that really inspire you in the everyday life. And so I put this call out on Facebook and on Instagram to try and get people to come and join me in this idea. And to my surprise, I got no responses. So this was quite disheartening, but thankfully I've always been a bit of a contrary Mary, and hearing the word no really makes me want to do something and prove people wrong. So I decided to have a different approach. So I started thinking of women that really inspired me, which was really, really lucky that I was living in Brighton at the time because there are lots of creative women in this city. So I started small and locally to begin with, and then I started thinking further afield, emailing photographers that I'd always admired, or artists, or public speakers, and to my surprise, people really responded well. They could see, I guess hopefully through my passion, but also that there wasn't this space for them to tell their stories. So Typical Girls was really intended to be that space to kind of shout about the women that you really, really admire in your everyday lives. So I had all of the content together in the summer of 2015, and this is then what my life looked like. I was working in a fudge shop in the lanes, and as you can see from my fudge snake, I was a very dedicated worker. So I'd heard of this program called InDesign, and as you can see from my very nicely put together presentation, I'm not a graphic designer at all. But to my surprise, I ended up working with one. So this is Chani Wisdom, and she was studying graphic design at Brighton at the time. So somebody told me to approach her and ask her to put InDesign on my laptop. And her her reaction was to say that InDesign wouldn't actually fit on my laptop because it didn't have enough memory. So kind of fallen at the first hurdle then. But Chani, some would say haphazardly enough, decided to get involved. Little to her knowledge that getting involved meant sifting through my very, very disorganized files containing just pages and pages of interviews. So she painstakingly sat there and sifted through my huge mess and created this really beautiful publication. So Chani, since then, out of that kind of serendipity, has become our art director and is my business partner and has maintained being this other half of Typical Girls ever since. So in October 2015, a lot in my life changed. I changed my degree course, and in the first week of starting it, I launched Typical Girls. So this is the pop-up shop that we had to launch it, which was a lovely project called It Is What It Is. They took over a space in the North Lanes and they rented it out to young creatives between the ages of 18 and 25. So you went and you proposed your project and then you got this lovely shop space for a week. So part of the one aspect of Typical Girls is that we didn't want to just put out a publication and have it sit there and stagnate. We wanted to create conversations around it and have those conversations help it grow and transform what the space actually is. So we had a series of talks and events and workshops which were free and really tried to make that space as accessible as possible. We also had this lovely shop, my favourite shop in Brighton, sorry, other shops in Brighton, which is on Trafalgar Street. The owner, Martin Skelton, I used to go in there before Typical Girls was ever a real thing and was just a kind of pipe dream, and talk to him about what makes a good publication. We used to look at all of the covers and see which ones stood out, and he agreed to stock it in an act of blind faith before it was ever even a product. So this was a real pinch me moment for me, where we got Typical Girls stocked in his shop, and it got to take up the shop front. And it's still in there today, and they're still one of our biggest supporters. Thanks. So since then, we've released 2 more publications. So our second publication was based around the body, and then our most recent publication, which came out in May of this year, was based around generations. We've had some really incredible moments through running this publication. So for those of you that didn't understand the name to begin with, it's taken from a Slits song. And for those of you that don't know, the Slits were this incredible all-female punk band in the 70s who just kind of redefined what it meant to be a woman on the stage. They weren't there to kind of be dressed up and look a certain way. They were kind of, the lead singer, Ari Up, used to piss on the stage a lot. She's really famous for pissing. So this is Viv Albertine, the guitarist, and she actually gave a talk in this very lecture theatre, and afterwards we ran up to her and hounded her, gave her a copy, and managed to somehow end up interviewing her for our second issue, so it all kind of managed to come full circle for us. This is a shoot that we did with ID in 2016, and we were approached by the deputy editor, Lynette Nylander, who is a really incredible woman who's done a lot for representation in publishing. She's now working as the deputy editor of Teen Vogue, and she's set to really, really change the landscape of publishing. So we weren't sure whether we would even make it into the pages and the final cut of the print because me and Chani aren't the most photogenic people ever. We're very, very uncomfortable when cameras come down to it. So this photo was actually taken when the photographer, Jack Davidson, asked us to talk to each other about something, and we just couldn't think of anything, so burst out laughing. And I remember the day really distinctly when the magazine came. I ordered my subscription so I knew it would come to my door. And I came home and I ripped it open and I flipped through all the pages being like, are we in there? Are we in there? And to my surprise, we are on a full page. And we've been really, really supported by lots of other publications, and that's the really beautiful thing about the publishing industry. It doesn't have the same competitive edge. But one thing when you're doing press interviews that people ask you again and again is what sets you apart from other publications. And I'm much more interested in thinking about what aligns us with other publications, because there is now this movement within women's publishing where people are starting to move towards self-representation and creating this diverse and really intellectual arena for women where they aren't talking down to their readers, they're acknowledging that they are intelligent people with these really full and vibrant lives. So for me, this is a real turning point within the industry. This is Riposte Magazine. They describe themselves as a magazine, a smart magazine for women. And this is their most recent issue with Erica Hart on the cover. So Erica Hart suffered from breast cancer, and this is her post-mastectomy on the cover of their magazine. Erica's a really, really incredible, inspiring, passionate woman, and as you can see from this beautiful photo of her, growing up, I could not begin to imagine entering into a magazine shop and seeing this cover staring back out at me. But that's the thing. The landscape of women's publishing has really changed, and publishing in general. You can see it when you go into Magazine Brighton. When they first opened their store, they didn't have that many publications, but now there are new ones springing up all the time. They have them like running all the way down to the floors. They're just full to bursting. And you also start to see that there are people of colour staring back out at you when you go into that shop now, which hopefully has created this arena where now young people of colour can see themselves in the pages of magazines too. So as part of this talk, Rifa asked us to give us our top tips, which feels like a very strange fate being 22 and having just graduated from my degree in June. And I've spent the last 4 months of my life freaking out about what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to give it a go anyway. So I think the most important thing to me is that success is subjective. To some people, it might be making $1 million. To some people, it might be having a family. To some people, it's simply getting up in the morning and leaving the house. Figure out what success is to you and don't let other people define it. The other part of this is to reward yourself for your successes, no matter how small they are. Reward yourself when you leave the house in the morning. Reward yourself when you cook yourself a meal. Reward yourself when you call up your mum when you haven't for a while. And the other part that has been really, really key for me is finding people that you can work with and appreciating them. That's something I could probably be challenged to do more. This is the incredible team that I work with. So we have Chani, our art director, on the left, and Celia Costa, who's our new editor, on the right. They push our publication to grow and transform, and they challenge me to do my work even better. Without them, Typical Girls wouldn't exist. So that gives you a bit of an idea about us. Thank you for listening.